Hello, this is Brian. Today is Wednesday, October 8th, 2025, and I'm here at the Burnt Rancheria Campground here in the Laguna Mountains here in San Diego County, California. It is time for a special edition of Spotlight on Trees. So today's episode is going to focus on another rare species. Today, we are looking at the Cuyamaca Cypress. This is Hesperocyparis stephensonii. This is a native, rare, evergreen coniferous tree, generally small to medium size, and it is a member of the Cypress family, the Cupressaceae. This is a tree that I have never seen in the wild, but I have seen several times in cultivation and planted and in cultivation. It's basically the same thing. So what we have here is a pretty mature sized one here. There's actually a much larger one kind of hidden off in the brush over near a maintenance station at the edge of the campground, and I will go over there and show you some footage of that. But so what we have here is a tree that's only native to a couple of small areas in the area. And it's native basically just to parts of San Diego County and locally likely into Baja California, Mexico. And it is a part of the peninsular mountain ranges, which basically follow the spine from the Santa Ana Mountains and Santa Ana Mountains in Orange County, San Jacinto Mountains in Riverside County, all the way down to the tip of southern Baja California Sur. And that's the whole province of peninsular ranges, and this tree is basically endemic to that. So, what are some things about the Cuyamaca Cypress? First of all, some introductory information on this tree. This tree has had quite a topsy-turvy taxonomical revision over the centuries. This tree was originally labeled as a part of the Arizona cypress complex. Originally, this was part of the Arizona cypress, Hesperocyparis arizonica. So this tree used to be labeled as a part of the complex of the much more widely occurring Hesperocyparis arizonica, and is very closely related to Hesperocyparis arizonica, and is very similar to Hesperocyparis arizonica. So at one point, this was labeled Hesperocyparis arizonica or Cupressaceae arizonica, because Cupressaceae is often also used as a science name, the scientific name. It usually refers to the old world cypresses, especially in Europe, like Cupressus sempervirens, the Italian cypress. But a lot of the western cypresses were separated into Hesperocyparis, which is Greek for western cypress. So again, Cupressaceae or Hesperocyparis arizonica was one of the names, just the straight species name. Then it was also listed as Hesperocyparis arizonica subspecies arizonica, being more closely related to the full-blown Arizona cypress of Arizona, and it was also named Hesperocyparis arizonica subspecies stephensonii as a different subspecies of the Arizona cypress. However, it has been graduated to its own species now. It's been elevated to its own species, and there's another extremely rare species of cypress here in Southern California called the Paiute cypress, which is found in the Paiute Mountains and some of those local areas in northern central Kern County. And I do have not an official spotlight video, because this was before I did spotlights, but I do have a video clip about Paiute cypress if you're interested in checking that out. You can check that out if you're interested in seeing how similar the Paiute cypress looks to this Cuyamaca cypress here. So, as name implies, it is a cypress. The genus name Hesperocyparis, or Cupressaceae, if you still want to use the old world name. And it's related to other plants like junipers, incense cedars, and Port Orford cedar, western red cedar. It's also related to giant sequoia, coast redwood, which are all under Cupressaceae. So, what are some things about the Cuyamaca cypress? Well, this tree generally grows, again, only in a small grove or two here in Southern California along the southwestern flank of Cuyamaca Peak in the King Creek Research Area, draining the southwestern slopes of Cuyamaca, I think from about 5,000 feet and down a little bit lower than that. Here we are at about 5,960 feet above sea level here. We're almost at 6,000 feet. And so like I said, I've never been to the King Creek Research Area. I think it's supposed to be a logistical nightmare to get into it, whether it's getting permission. I don't know if you have to get permission or if you have to hike a redonkulous amount of miles to get into it. I haven't fully invested research into that. But let's I'm gonna start talking about some of the salient features that really stand out about the Cuyamaca cypress. After I snap a few pictures of this, I had to pause my clip for a second because there were some loud helicopters, military helicopters flying overhead. So I'm gonna get a few pictures of this beautiful tree and we'll start talking some more about it. And I'll show you a much larger specimen towards the end of this video so you can get an appreciation for some of the larger ones here. So being that this is a cypress tree, it has a lot of features that you'd expect to see with the genus Cupressaceae or genus Hesperocyparis. Small spur twigs with tiny scale-like leaves. Very tiny scale-like leaves. And the leaves have a little, really tiny, and you're not going to see this on camera. In fact, you're really going to have to look closely at this tree, the branches, to see that it has a small white resin dot on the scale-like leaves. And the scale-like leaves are tiny. The camera itself is not going to do any justice, but if you really look closely, you'll see kind of like a diamond-shaped pattern on these little twiglets, which is the scale-like leaf of the cypress. And then you'll see a little tiny, almost microscopic white fleck, and that's a resin dot. Cypress trees tend to be very resinous, especially the Arizona Paiute and Cuyamaca cypress. They are very resinous trees. You'll see sap dripping all over the place sometimes once a branch gets compromised. And it is an extremely fragrant tree. It is an absolutely wonderful aroma that comes from a lot of species in the Cypress family. Cuyamaca cypress has a very, very awesome Christmassy aroma. But you can see how the twigs sometimes have a little bit of a flake here. The bark flakes off, and then you get to see a smooth, really smooth, satisfying brown surface of the upper twigs, with a little touch of green in there, because this is a relatively young branch. And you notice that the color of the foliage is very glaucous. It's bluish, grayish green, which is pretty standard in the Arizona cypress complex. So I'm considering this still part of the Arizona cypress complex in that it is not the same species anymore, but it is a very closely related species that was previously known as it. But Arizona cypress also has this glaucous colored foliage. The Paiute cypress is a little bit greener. But we're not talking about Paiute cypress. So, very glaucous color. Glaucous color is pretty much an adaptation to places that are often pretty dry. It helps reflect some of the excess sun off of the foliage and back out into the air. And it helps conserve water loss, because these trees can grow some pretty dry areas. The southwestern slope of Cuyamaca Peak is basically chaparral, punctuated by a few scattered cypress trees here and there. So this tree is commonly found in the middle of chaparral. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe it might merge in with the conifers a little bit higher up, but it's generally found in the chaparral. It's more of a chaparral species. And so now we're going to talk about some of the reproductive structures on the cypress, after I get another picture or two of the foliage, so you can see just how beautifully colored it is. Alright, so now let's talk about the reproductive structures of the cypress. Now, a cypress family is a family of conifers. Conifers are trees, plants, shrubs that bear their seeds in cones, or structures that are called cones. And sometimes in that term can be used, loosely used to other species of plants, such as the yews and the podocarps, which don't look like they have cones on them. But that's a discussion reserved for another video. Now, the cypress trees do have the traditional cones. Now, they're not the shape of pine cones. Such as true pines, like these Jeffrey pines here, Pinus Jeffrey, they have their typical beehive cone shape, or sometimes it's just shaped like a miniature pine tree. Cypress trees cones, and this varies by genus. Cupressaceae and Hesperocyparis have rounded woody cones. These are the cones of the Cuyamaca Cypress. And since this tree grows in a fire-prone habitat, very dry, these cones stay closed for a very long time on the tree, sometimes for decades. And usually extreme heat or fire, or sometimes drying out, will get the cones to open. So for instance, these cones will probably stay closed on this tree for years and years. These are relatively newer cones here. They are not fully hardened off. Now, when they are fully ripened, after they fully ripen, they turn woody. Then they become very woody and hard. So, like a lot of conifers, their cones are woody. And they're kind of shaped like pointy soccer balls. So what's going to happen is you'll see these lines. If you look carefully at the cone, you can see these lines that kind of dissect the topography of the cone. Those are where the cones are going to open when they eventually do. But like I said, if you're looking at a tree, a very intact tree without a bunch of branch failure, you're going to mostly just be seeing closed cones. However, this tree does have open cones because there are some branches that fell off and dried up. So now I need to go show you those. Here we go. Now if the branch is in good shape and there hasn't been a fire, the cones will stay closed. But when they open, this is what they look like when they're open. You can see those same lines I pointed out on the closed cone are now where the scales of the cone separate. And then these little tiny seeds come out. I guess it generally requires fire to get these open, but also desiccation if the branch is severed. You can see here, this cone is still mostly closed. These cones are still closed. These cones have probably been here for decades. This one here, I guess, I don't know if they do occasionally open, but for the most part, they're going to stay closed for an extremely long time. And you'll get these little brownish seeds coming out of them that if sufficient rain or snow falls and moistens the ground enough, will yield seedlings in the spring. I've been able to germinate Arizona cypress before. I had Arizona cypress seedlings for a few years. And I basically just put the seeds in a moist paper towel, put them in a Ziploc bag, and put them in the refrigerator, and watch over a couple months and see if little tiny white roots start coming out of them. And so if you stratify them, moist stratification for a couple months in the refrigerator, you'll probably get sprouts. And I had most of my seeds sprouted. I'm not sure if it's a similar process, if it's going to be a similar germination rate with Cuyamaca Cypress. I assume it would probably be pretty likely, but I haven't tried Cuyamaca Cypress seeds yet. But so we're still talking about the reproductive structures of the trees. Now, for you who have some botany background, the cones are the seed cones are the female structures. They release the seeds. So what pollinates a female cone? Well, you're gonna have to look a lot harder to see these, but if you look here in the screen, you might see some yellow, spots of yellow on this branch. Right there in the center of the screen. Those are the male cones, the little tiny yellow male strobili. In other words, they're male cones. They're the ones that produce the pollen that pollinate the seeds, the seed cones, the female cones. So these are the male pollen seed cones. And they're usually very tiny. And it looks like they bloom more towards autumn here. So they're not true flowers. They're technically called cones as well. So, I'm going to get a couple pictures of this tree, and I'm going to go on to another couple of them so I can show you some other interesting features of this beautiful tree. Alright, so on to a smaller tree here, a little bit smaller. There's Cuyamaca Cypress. So I showed you what the smoother texture of the upper twigs is like. Now I want to show you what the structure, what the bark is like on larger branches and eventually the trunks. So as you go down the larger branches and the upper middle trunks of the tree, you start getting this multicolored splotchy bark that peels seasonally. So what happens is you get these flakes that seasonally peel off, revealing different layers of brownish, even some slightly oranges, and even a slightly greenish brown color underneath. So this is what the larger branches and the trunks of the smaller Cuyamaca Cypress appear. This is how they appear. So it's quite satisfying. It's actually quite similar to another rare species of cypress that is mostly found in Orange, San Diego counties, and northern Baja, which is the Tecate cypress, which isn't as closely related as this is to the Arizona cypress. But it is another species that does get this splotchy bark too. But as the tree's trunk gets larger and larger, let me see if I can get in here without getting stuck on something. Then we start getting more of that shreddy texture as the trunks get larger. I couldn't have done this on the other tree because I couldn't physically get to the trunks of that tree because the branches were going all the way to the ground. So here you have it. This is the bark of Hesperocyparis stephensonii. Very flaky, maybe flaky slash furrowed more towards the base. And of course it still peels away, but you still have more of the flakiness on the lower and larger trunks of this tree. Now this tree, as mentioned before, is mostly a small to medium-sized tree. It's anywhere from maybe 15 feet tall to maybe 45 feet tall. I'm going to show you one that's actually a bit larger towards the end of this video. This one here is probably a pretty typical size for what you'd expect to find in the wild. Now, seeing that this is growing in a very densely populated area of trees and shrubs, this one tends to be a little bit more narrowly growing to get the light. But you notice that the branches kind of have that loose, kind of flaying kind of flaying about kind of texture. It's pretty typical on Cuyamaca Cypress. The ends of the branches are quite narrow and they kind of splosh about, as you see here. Kind of have a loose texture. Now, trees in the King Creek area, I've seen pictures of the trees, never actually seen them as I've never been there, tend to be a little more squat, and like you saw in this one, probably are going to be typically multi-trunked. Or at least branch near the base. So if you're wanting to see a trunk of a tree, a lot of times you might have to bushwhack. But yeah, you can see kind of the wild, kind of untamed texture at the end of the twigs as they form a relatively narrowly conical crown on this tree here, but you can kind of see, typical for our cypresses, they kind of have a loose texture at the end of the branches. So that's another pretty good example. That's probably typically what you're going to see, but probably since you're going to mostly see these out in chaparral, if you do catch sight of them in the wild, they're going to be a little bit fatter, maybe more broadly conical as well. Now, here's a related tree that you might possibly see near it, but typically a little bit higher up in the mountains. And this is another Cypress family tree. This is the incense cedar. This is Cupressaceae decurrens. This is a related tree. Not very likely to be confused with it, and I'll show you precisely why momentarily. And it's because of the texture, the cinnamon bark, cinnamon rough furrowed bark, and the foliage is richer green. It's a lighter green color. This is the incense cedar. It's a Cypress family member, so its male pollen cones are similar, but the sprays of foliage are flattened. You can see the flattened cross section of a twig. The cypress isn't flattened. See, this is branched out in all different directions. It's not literally in a plane like the incense cedar. And the incense cedar's seed cones are very much different. Let's see if I can find a good example here on the floor. This right here is an open incense cedar cone. And when they're closed, they're shaped like duckbills, not like pointy soccer balls. So again, this is the incense cedar. It is a related Cupressaceae. It is related to this Cuyamaca Cypress. And now for my grand finale, I'm going to show you the largest one I can show you. I'm probably not going to be able to get great visual footage of it because it's tucked away amongst a bunch of other trees like some Jeffrey pines and California black oaks. But it's definitely a much bigger specimen. So I'm going to get a couple pictures of this tree and then I'm going to go head over and show you that one. Alright, so for the last portion of this video, we're going to take a look at a much larger Cuyamaca Cypress. This one's got more height to it than the other specimens. But again, kind of tucked away amongst a thicket of pines and oaks. So this one's probably closer to 50, 60 feet tall right here. So this is another Cuyamaca Cypress. Let's see if I can get over towards the base of it. Get through some black oak here. And again, the glaucous colored foliage. Ooh, these cones are actually starting to open. Slightly. But here's the trunks. It's very hard to get to the trunks of a lot of cypress trees because they got very low branches. So here's again, that peeling bark. Beautiful peeling bark, and this is a decent sized trunk, and this is a single trunk tree here. So this is Hesperocyparis stephensonii. Another place you can see this tree is you can see one planted if you hike down Woodson Mountain on the paved service road. Once you're near the bottom of Woodson Mountain, you're hiking up the paved road to the top. There's actually a small one that's out in the open if you check out my video and skip towards the end of it, unless you want to watch the whole video, that's up to you. Skip towards the last 10-15 minutes of the video, you'll see me point out a Cuyamaca Cypress there as well. Much smaller than this, I'll tell you. This is a pretty decent sized cypress tree. Pretty nice. So the Cuyamaca Cypress, a local area endemic here in Southern California, which is basically southwestern side of Cuyamaca Peak, maybe just across the border a little bit, but occasionally planted as well. Occasionally planted, so you'll sometimes see these things planted. Keep your eye out for that. The Cuyamaca Cypress, a rare Southern California native tree. Thanks for tuning into this special edition of Spotlight on Trees. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed filming another rare species of tree that grows here. This is basically going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next Spotlight video.